Good morning, everyone. I'm Esma van Zonder from the University of the Free State. This is the second of six research presentations that I'm organizing. So today is my privilege to, my English is running out, to present Ms. Tamsin Suliaman from UCT. She's going to talk about advanced searching for evidence synthesis. Tamsin is a senior librarian at UCT Libraries. She oversees the Research and Innovation Department at UCT Libraries. She was a health science librarian for 6 years prior to her current position. She has a BA in Form and Media and a PG DIP LIS, both from the UCT. She has been involved in research librarianship for over 13 years, in that time co-authoring 4 publications. She's also passionate about mentorship through sharing knowledge, skills, and experience. Tamsin, so much. So thank you. Sorry, my English is, I'm sorry, Yella. Thank you so very much for agreeing to do this presentation for us. I'm sure we're all going to learn a lot. I know basics about systematic reviews, and that's basically what I know about systematic reviews. So thank you. Over to you. Then can I please ask, I see not everyone can put something in the chat. Apelile, that the chat is just being opened up so that people can put in their names for the Lyasa CPD points, and also I will look at the chats for questions. Thank you very much. Over to you, Tamsin.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me, Esma. So this morning I'm going to talk a little bit about advanced searching for evidence synthesis. So a couple of years ago, I probably would have called this advanced searching for systematic reviews, but I think we've come a long way since we only looked at systematic reviews. So I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about the different types of reviews that we look at. And then just a broad overview of what is evidence synthesis. So evidence synthesis refers to a process of bringing together information from a range of sources and disciplines to inform debates and decisions on specific issues. So it's really a tool, a way of bringing across a lot of information in a synthesized, systematic way. And this just helps those who are making decisions or policies to be able to see that information at a glance. And all of us deal with evidence synthesis in one way or another. Even your traditional literature review is a type of evidence synthesis. Of course, it's more prone to bias and all the rest of it, but it is a type of evidence synthesis that we do look at. Then, of course, the things that we are more familiar with: systematic literature review, systematic review, scoping reviews, rapid reviews, and bibliometric analysis. So these are the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So just very briefly, the reason I bring up literature review, even though most of us know this very well, is to compare how it's different to a systematic review. So a literature review is a review that synthesizes current knowledge pertaining to the research question. This synthesis is the foundation that, through the use of logical argumentation, allows the researcher to build a convincing thesis case. So, of course, this is our bread and butter for research librarians. This is what we do day to day. So the reason I'm bringing up the characteristics again is as a comparison to what we will look at when we look at a systematic review. So the characteristics of a literature review is that it provides context for your research. It identifies seminal work and scholars in the field. It acknowledges existing theories, points of view, hypotheses, etc. It justifies the research, clears up misconceptions about previous research, shows where the research fits into the existing body of knowledge, highlights flaws in previous research, outlines gaps, etc. And it shows how your work is adding to the understanding and knowledge of the field. So, what is a systematic review? So when we talk about evidence synthesis, I think the first thing that comes to people's mind is systematic review. So a systematic review is a review of a clearly formulated question that uses systematic and explicit methods to identify, select, and critically appraise relevant research. and to collect and analyze data from the studies that are included in the review. Systematic reviews are characterized by being methodical, comprehensive, transparent, and replicable. And that last part is really where the basis of what we're going to cover today. So it's in that we're the ones that guide the methodical, the comprehensive, transparent, and replicable process when we are working with our researchers. So we show them the step-by-step guide. We're like, this is how we're going to do this and tackle this problem. And it allows them to then generate their methodology from that. So what are the characteristics of a systematic review? So a systematic review is a clearly stated set of objectives with predefined eligibility criteria for studies, an explicit and reproducible methodology, a systematic search that attempts to identify all of the available studies that would meet the eligibility criteria, an assessment of the validity of the findings that are included in the studies, for example, through the assessment of risk of bias, and a systematic presentation and synthesis of the characteristics and findings of the included studies. And then some of the newer kids on the block is our rapid review. So, and I think especially since the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen a big rise in rapid reviews where information had to come out a lot quicker, where we had to make use of the information that as it was being presented to us. It's not to say that this didn't exist before, but I think we really saw a rise in the number of rapid reviews because it was so timeless in how people were dealing with the information coming in. So a rapid review is a type of knowledge synthesis in which the components of a systematic review process are simplified or omitted to produce information in a short period of time. So again, we're following similar steps as a systematic review. We just can't use as many databases. We are using limited time frames, etc. So we have to move really quickly with a rapid review. Also, a traditional systematic review can take anywhere from 18 months to 24 months to produce a full review. A rapid review typically happens within about 6 months. Scoping review, and this one's become a lot more popular lately, and I would say especially in our social sciences, engineering's been doing a lot of scoping reviews. So this one is also emerging as quite a particular trend that we're seeing, especially at UCT. I can't speak for other institutions. This is what we're seeing. A scoping review is a type of research synthesis that aims to map the literature on a particular topic or research area and provide an opportunity to identify key concepts, gaps in the research, and types of sources of evidence to inform practice, policymaking, and research. Scoping reviews are useful for examining emerging evidence when it is still unclear what other, more specific questions can be posed and valuably addressed by a more precise systematic review. So scoping reviews often considered a precursor to a systematic review. So we kind of gauge what the research landscape looks like. And through doing this, we can identify a more specific topic that we'd like to investigate through a systematic review. Of course, it's become a standalone piece. And I think when it started, it was very much that kind of precursor to a systematic review. So this image is really small, but there is a link to the image in the slides if you want to look at it. And so I don't imagine that you can read it all very well, but this is from, I believe it is Cornell University. And it's just, it's a decision tree to help you decide what is the right type of review. And this has been useful for many students because some of them come in with really grand ideas of what they want to do, and the topic is not appropriate for the type of review that they want to address. So for instance, they want to do a systematic review, but they have 5 different research questions that they want to look at. And that's where you may suggest maybe you want to look a little bit more broader and try and do a scoping review, or and with honors students, especially when they want to do systematic reviews, like maybe try focusing on a rapid review because you have very limited time in which to produce this. So the decision tree is just a useful tool to have, and it does help you decide what is the correct path. So what is the process? So I'm going to talk a lot about systematic reviews, but just know that the process really applies to all of the reviews that we dealt with. But anyway, like I said, a few years ago, this would have been titled systematic reviews. But because we move with the times, so the systematic review process is you start with a clearly defined question with inclusion and exclusion criteria. So you have to know going into your search or going into your project, what is it that I'm looking for? And what would I not consider to be part of that? And then once we have a clear idea of what the research question is, we then go into our systematic search of the literature. And this is often where we as librarians get involved. Then there's the critical appraisal of the included studies. And again, we can guide, but it's not really our role. And then the part that we usually step away from them and say you're on your own now is data extraction and management, analysis and interpretation of results, and then reporting for publication. So the research question. Unfortunately, you can't go into any evidence synthesis project without having a good, clearly defined research question. So you can start with a great topic. So you want to explore the effectiveness of music therapy in improving cognitive functions of children with intellectual disabilities. And that's a great topic. You want to explore that a little bit further. But if I were going to do a systematic review on this topic, how would I make it tangible? What would I be answering? How would I know that I've actually answered that research question? So there are multiple ways of approaching the question. And oftentimes I feel like we at UCT have helped with the formulation of this question, is what is it that you're trying to answer? Within that systematic review, we do have to be on our way to answering a particular question. So we could say, does music therapy influence the cognitive functions of children with intellectual disabilities? Or is music therapy an effective intervention on the cognitive functions of children with intellectual disabilities? There's a tangible answer. We can say, yes, it does, or no, it doesn't, based on the literature that we're finding. So I always say that the difference between our systematic scoping reviews is we let the literature answer the questions as opposed to us cherry picking the answers that support our hypothesis. And so we're letting the literature guide us into the answer to this question. So once we have our topic and we want to start breaking it down a little bit further into the components, how are we going to start searching for this? How do we start looking at this in more sizable chunks? And this is where the frameworks come into play. And so all of this is trying to help us get to the point where we can start breaking down this topic into its components so that we can start creating an effective search. So this is really where we start looking at what exactly is it what are the components of this question that help us in breaking down the topic into searchable pieces. So I think the most popular framework, and anyone who works in the health sciences will know this one very well, and that is the OPITEL. The most popular, probably the original and stateful intervention style studies. But you've got your population, intervention, comparison, and outcome. So who is the group who are we looking at? Who are we studying? And sometimes the question is not as easy to answer. So if you're looking at nurses who work in pediatrics, for instance, are we looking at the pediatric patients, or are we looking at the nurses? Sometimes the population isn't always as clear cut as we think. Every once in a while, you get a really nice question that you're like, oh, that's so easy. Here's the population, here's the intervention, here's the comparison, and here's the outcome. What I will say is the comparison is also one that is not always extremely clear. Because sometimes when we say there is no comparison, the comparison is actually standard key. So if we're trying to test whether a new drug is effective, so we have this new drug that is um, meant to bring down fevers in children. What is the traditional treatment that we would normally use? And that is our comparison. So we have drug B, but what we normally give children to bring down their fever is Panado. So we want to test drug B against Panado, and that's the comparison. But the comparison doesn't always have to be there. It's just whatever is normally done, and if nothing is done, this is a new intervention, nothing's ever been done to help us, then there's just no comparison. But in a traditional study, there would be a comparison. Then the next are all just variations on PICO. So we got because, which includes study design. So for instance, a randomized control trial, longitudinal studies, etc. PCOS, which includes a time frame. So we're looking within a time frame for these studies. PI, so this one was, I would say, the first iteration for qualitative studies, population intervention and evaluation. Since, as I should say, since the inception of PI, there have been other more effective strategies or frameworks rather that have been more useful. What I like to call the other PICO. So it is still PICO, but this one looks at population, phenomenon of interest, which is where the I comes from, and context. And again, this one is more for your qualitative studies. It works better for your social sciences. People don't feel as boxed in by that PICO, by the original PICO, the population intervention comparison and outcome. This one gives you a little bit more freedom. And then just to say, every other day there is another new framework that comes out. So we try and keep as up to date with them as possible, but there's always a new one. These are just some of the most popular ones. And then there is SPICE. So SPICE also is a great one for your more scientific studies that don't necessarily fit into traditional PICO. So setting, so where is it taking place? Perspective, so for whom? Intervention, comparison and evaluation. And then the last one is SPIDER. So looking at sample size, phenomenon of interest, study design, evaluation, and research type. So these are all of our different frameworks. The framework obviously depends on the question. If the question doesn't fit a traditional PICO, we try and find ways of making it fit one of these. And if it really doesn't, you have to decide if this is really a question that fits with a scoping or a systematic review. But again, that's also for the researcher to make up their minds. So the reason we look at this kind of PICO model is the most relevant studies are going to be at the intersection of all of these. This is where they intersect with each other, and that is going to be our most relevant studies. So I've just created a question here, and it's, are school-based intervention programs more effective in reducing substance use amongst adolescents than community-based intervention? So we've got adolescents who may be susceptible to using substances. We've got school-based interventions. We're comparing that with community-based interventions. And obviously the outcome we're looking for is reduced substance use. So this is just a way of breaking down our different topics. So our inclusion and exclusion criteria is something that we really need to think about right from the beginning. And this lets us know, how do we know whether a paper is actually going to fit? What are the boundaries of that question? So inclusion and exclusion criteria set the boundaries for the review. They are determined after setting the research question and usually before the search is conducted. And there are many different factors that can be used as inclusion, exclusion criteria. Again, I don't expect you to be able to read all of this. It's really tiny. I do apologize, but I have left the link in the slides if you want to go and have a look at this. But it could be things like the date. So just making sure that it takes place within 2015 to 2025, whatever your date range is. It's usually when that thing was introduced or when it has had a significant impact on research. That's typically your starting date. Your exposure of interest, it could be a geographic location. So am I looking specifically in South Africa? Am I looking specifically in sub-Saharan Africa? Am I looking specifically in low and middle income countries, etc.? So what is the geographic location of your study? And what's the impact or the significance of that location as to why you're choosing that location? Language. So in big studies, in big systematic reviews, they often have funding to get papers translated. But if it's your everyday master's, PhD student, they usually don't have that kind of funding. So often what they'll do is limit to English articles. And that can also be considered a bias. That is something that needs to be explicitly stated if it is something that's going to be used. And then participants. So it could be sample size, it could be an age group, etc. Are the papers peer-reviewed, reported outcomes, the setting, study design, etc. So, and this is just a small list of the common types of inclusion, exclusion. Obviously, it depends very much on the researcher, the research question. So there are a lot of studies that really don't fit the whole model and is never going to fit in cleanly with the whole systematic review process. It can still be a systematic review. It's just how are we going to approach it? So yeah, I've just put in a few examples that I could find of ones that I found that wouldn't traditionally fit in with our framework. Okay. So we have sat with our researcher, we have looked at the research question, we have decided on the appropriate framework. So whether we're going to use Pico, Pi, other Pico, Spice or Spider. We've decided on what the inclusion, exclusion criteria are. And now we're going to get into the actual searching. And this is where we come into. This is where our search techniques come into it. So often we use the 2015 PRESS checklist. So that's the peer review of electronic search strategies. Sorry, I had to hyperlink it in the bottom because I often forget what PRESS stands for. So the things that we're going to do is we're going to look at the translation of the research question. So have we understood what the researcher is asking? Have we been able to identify the terms, the appropriate terms? Have we looked at enough terms for the research question? We add our Boolean and proximity operators. We look for subject headings, very importantly, and I think I took my slide out with subject headings, which is crazy. But subject headings, especially if you are in the health sciences, you want to make sure that you are checking the mesh headings. So from either the PubMed database, or if you have Medline via EBSCO or Ovid or all the various iterations of Medline. Then once we've checked for subject headings, we look for free text terms. So making sure that we have touched all the data, all our different bases. Have we looked at all the various spellings, syntax, and line numbers? So are we sure of the layout of our search? Are we sure that it's going to yield the results that we're looking for? Have we considered British versus American spelling? Then we're adding our limits and filters. So are we looking at English only articles? Are we looking in a particular date range? Are we looking for only peer-reviewed papers? And then after we've run our search, are there any adaptations we need to make? So do we need to go back to the drawing board? Is it yielding the results that we're looking for? And here's where I'm going to get a collective groan from the librarians, because we all know this one so well, the Boolean searching. But the reason I'm bringing it up is just because it's so vital to how we create our searches for our evidence synthesis searching. So making sure we've got all our ors in the right places, and making sure that we're broadening our search wide enough. So making sure we've got every iteration of that term, we've clearly understood what the researcher is asking, and we've looked at how we can expand on our term. Putting our ands in the correct places, so limiting down enough for us to be able to hone in on those results that really are hitting the nail on the head. And of course, this is going to narrow down the number of results as opposed to our all. And then truncation. So I always go in with a warning on truncation. Not every database likes this. And if you do use PubMed quite a bit for your searching, then this one is a no-go, because it usually throws out so many different and various and random results that actually the truncation doesn't work. But in your traditional EBSCOhost and Scopus, it does work well. But it is also for you to test and see, is this making a significant difference? Whether I am going to add the truncation or not. Is it affecting my results negatively? As in, if I put in all the various terms versus the asterisk, am I now getting 5,000 results more than I would have? So I'll always say this, the whole thing about our testing, our searching for evidence synthesis, is that it is an iterative process. We go back to the drawing board multiple times. In fact, I almost never see one student only once. We meet at least once or twice to go through the search, because I normally tell them to go away, go and see the results, and then tell me, what am I seeing? What am I not seeing? So it is quite hard work in terms of the going back and forth, but it is so useful and so rewarding at the end of it. And then, of course, wildcards are particularly useful, especially where we've got the variant spelling, so women and women. And then probably I'd say the most important thing for our reviews are brackets and quotation marks. This one is particularly useful. And I'll show you why in a little bit. So I've got my topic. Are cognitive behavioral interventions aimed at reducing math anxiety in school children? Oh, I should have said, are they effective? Anyway, so my population is looking at school children ages 6 to 18. The intervention that we're looking at is cognitive behavioral intervention. And the outcome we're looking for is reduced math anxiety. So we take our topics. So we've got our details. So we've got our population. Who is our population? So now we start expanding. So we're looking at school students, but what are other terms that we have for school students? We've got pupils, learners. Our age group that we're looking at is also children and adolescents or teenagers. So these are all terms that we could be looking at. Then we've also got our cognitive behavioral interventions. Now, it's not also for us to decide what are all the cognitive behavioral interventions. This is also where we meet with our researcher, and they also expand. And I often will ask, what do you mean by cognitive behavioral intervention? Or what are some of the most popular cognitive behavioral interventions that you've seen, that you've worked with? And this is where we come up with our terms like cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, problem solving, coping strategies, breathing. These are all potential cognitive behavioral interventions that could be used for for our search. And then when we look at math anxiety, we can also look at the term mathematics anxiety. So now we've looked at all the potential terms. We start breaking it up. So we're trying to keep it in those sets that we have. And this is often where people get confused, but I'm talking to a bunch of librarians, so I know you'll understand this. We often do individual searches for systematic reviews. So we search it line by line. So we start with our school students, we start with pupils, learners, and we're doing these all as individual searches as opposed to doing it in one go. So it's going to start with our school students or pupils or learners or children or adolescents or teenagers. We will then move into our search 8, which continues from the previous one. And so this is going into our second set of results. So search 14 is actually our combination second set of results, which contains cognitive behavioral interventions, cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, problem solving, coping strategies, etc. And then we go into math anxiety or mathematics anxiety, which gives us our final search, which is our search 18. So yes, we have 18 terms in total, or 18 searches in total, which gives us our answer. So apologies for the way this looks, but since EBSCOhost has changed its interface, which is horrible in my opinion, you'll see that if we look at the recent search or the recent activity, I've started with my school students as my first search. I then go into pupils, into learners, and I'll continue with children, adolescents, teenagers, until I do a combined search with all of them. And then this takes me to my final set of results. So you'll see it should line up perfectly with the other one until we get to our final search. Which is our search 18, which is search 7 and search 14 and search 17. So my screenshots, they used to look a lot better when before EBSCO changed its interface, and it laid it out quite nicely line by line. And then this should give me my results. So I've got a result of 362, which is really not a bad result to start off with. And I can already see from the first result, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for mathematics anxiety among school adolescents. So I'm like, okay, I know I'm on the right path. This sounds good. I could be finding all the articles I need for this particular search. So the way most of us will know it and how that search can also be interpreted is as school students or pupils or children or learners or adolescents and teenagers in brackets. And this is how most of us will know it. But there's a particular reason why. I'm just going to go back a couple of slides. There's a reason why we do it this way. And it comes right to the name of what we're doing, a systematic review. So we're adding in the systematic aspect of it. So one, searching line by line gives us control over the search. It allows us to see which one is giving us too many results, which one is not giving us any results. And it gives the researcher justification on whether that term should still be included or whether they should take it out, whether it's throwing off their results quite significantly. It is also makes it a lot easier to see if we have missed something. Have we made a mistake along the way? Have we accidentally left out a quotation mark that should have been there? Yeah, it gives us a lot of control over our search so that we can systematically say we have gone through every possibility of the search. And while it's fine towards the end to use this search, one missing bracket, one missing inverted comma, one and that should be an or, and this whole search is messed up. And so this is why we tend to go with the more systematic approach of doing things line by line. And while it is time consuming and sometimes painful, and I have worked on systematic reviews where we've had over 200 terms, and that can be incredibly painful to do. It is still worth it, in my opinion, to do it that way, because it puts a lot of trust in you from your researcher while you are helping them. You know that you've followed the correct process. And when they have to report on the search strategy, and often they have to add the search as an addendum if they are publishing, then they can publish it as you've written it out. So while there's absolutely nothing wrong with this, and I think I've proven it in the next slide where I've done it in this way, and I'm still getting my 362 results. By doing it line by line, at least I know that I followed the correct procedure. And often what I'll do is actually just copy and paste it like this and give it to the researcher, so it's easy enough for them to go back to each time. But yeah, we want to follow the process. We want to go through and we're adding that systematic aspect back into our systematic review. So that is the searching. It is as advanced searching as we as librarians do, I would say. But I am going to continue with the process of our systematic review because it can be useful to just have that overview and that background. So now we have found all our articles. We found our 362 articles. Not that I would only ever just use one database. Of course, I would repeat this exact same search. My line by line searching in PubMed, I would just repeat it in Scopus. Whatever databases you have access to that you know of for your researchers, we're going to repeat the search. What I will say about the advanced searching is that not every database likes it. Of course, our EBSCOhosts and Scopus and Web of Sciences, they're pretty okay with it. But if you are working with someone from history or in one of the social sciences, and you have to use something like JSTOR, for instance, it's not going to work as effectively. Even ProQuest, to an extent, isn't as friendly with the advanced searching. But that's where it's also appropriate to use the slide or this type of search strategy. What you might even want to do with some of those databases is simplify it slightly. You still want to keep with the general theme, but you do want to simplify it slightly, but it's maybe break it down to its core components. Because you still want to be able to say that you followed the same search through each and every database. And that is the most important thing. The search strategy has to be consistent throughout. And if we think right back to the beginning of our systematic reviews, transparent and replicable, those are the two characteristics of our systematic review. And having our search, especially in our line-by-line format, ensures that it is consistent, ensures that it's replicable, ensures that 5 years from now, if I follow that same process, I'll find the same articles. Obviously, I'll find newer articles as well, but at least I know I'll also find the original articles from that search. Yeah, so now we have done all our searches in all our databases. Our researcher is happy. And now they want to move on to the next phase of the process, which is screening. So again, I will say, this is not our traditional role, but it is our role to know about it. So while not every librarian is going to be part of a research team, is going to be helping along with the screening process, it is okay for us to know about what goes into it, and also what are the tools that we can advise on when they are using the screening tools. So what is the purpose of screening? So screening ensures that the documents found address the research question and adhere to the inclusion and exclusion criteria. It also to eliminate bias, they also have to have at least 2 people involved in the screening process. So I think the question I get asked very often is, who is supposed to be my second reviewer? And I often want to say not me, but someone else. But it's typically their supervisor or someone else in the field that they are working in. It can't be any random person off the street. It is usually someone that they are working with. So the screening tools that we use are reference managers. So basically, once we have found all our results, and I'm just going to use the 362 from EBSCOhost as my example. Once we have found our results, I often advise people to immediately transfer all those results into a reference manager. So whether you have access to EndNote, RefWorks, Mendeley, Zotero, a host of other either paid or free tools, we typically recommend EndNote for our systematic reviews, but that's just because it's what our researchers want to use. But we also have RefWorks. I don't think RefWorks is as popular for systematic reviews, but it is a useful tool. And then we also have Rayon and Covidence, and I'll get into the Prisma diagram in a little bit. So the reference manager gathers all the references collected from the databases and allows you to categorize them according to source. And it also makes it easier to export into screening tools. The other great thing about the reference manager is it allows you to easily deduplicate your results. And the reason we're bringing up reference managers here as well is because reference managers firmly sit within the realm of the libraries usually. So it's things that we are very familiar with and we can guide our researcher to. And so please excuse the small nature of my screenshot. But what I'll typically do is in EndNote, under groups, create a group for each database. So EBSCOhost, Scopus, Web of Science, PubMed, I'll create a folder for each one of them. And then that allows me to manage the data references more effectively. And then when we deduplicate and you move those to trash, you can see exactly how many you've removed from the total list based on the number of duplicates you have. So I've just indicated the number of duplicate references in the screenshot. Then we move on to the actual tool. So the first one is Rayon. Rayon is a great tool. It is trying to push people towards the paid version with its great AI features. But the free to use version is fairly sufficient. And because it's free to use, it also helps with that removing of duplicates feature. And it allows screening by multiple people. So it's a really wonderful tool to direct your researchers to. This is what it looks like once you've uploaded. So you can create a title for it. You can say what kind of review it is, whether it's a systematic review, a scoping review, a rapid review. And then you can invite people to view it, and that will assist them. That will give you your second reviewer. And it also has a blind feature, which means my second reviewer can't see the decisions I've made, and they can't see the decisions. They can't see the decisions I've made, and I can't see what the decisions they've made. And that really helps quite a bit in that transparency. So we're eliminating bias by having 2 objective reviewers looking at the papers. And then there's the actual reviewing. So you can decide whether you want to include it, exclude it. And if you choose to exclude, you can create a reason. And if the reason that you want isn't there, you can basically customize this to whatever you want it to be. So you'll see on the right-hand side where it says students, math anxiety, mathematics anxiety. I customized all of this personally for my particular review. Because it comes with some pre-selected criteria, but those don't work for everyone. So you can customize this completely to whatever it is that you're looking for. And this is so useful. So it will pick up immediately in green the things that I'm looking for. The impact of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy on math anxiety in adolescents. And now I can read the abstract and decide, do I want to include it or exclude it? So like I said, this is a free to use tool. And yeah, it's great. And now that it's got some really wonderful AI features that could really help researchers along, but those are paid features. The other one is Covidence. And if your institution is lucky enough to have a subscription to Covidence, that's great. But if not, it does allow you to have a free trial version with up to 500 documents. So unfortunately, if your search yielded 501 documents, it's not going to work for you. It only allows 2 people to screen if you're using the free version. So for instance, yourself as the lead reviewer and one other person. So what's really nice about Covidence is that it automatically removes duplicates. There's a lot that Covidence does automatically for you, which is really nice. And one of those things is creating the Prisma diagram. So this is what it looks like when you go into Covidence. It will tell you how far you are, how many you still need to do. And then when you go into it, this is how you review it. So you can decide, is this a paper that we want to keep, or is it a maybe, or is it a yes? And you'll see, again, you can also do that customizing the tags. So for instance, I was looking at children ages 6 to 18, so school age children. And this particular paper was looking at college age children. So I'm going to say no to that one. Yeah, so again, it's a wonderful tool if you have a subscription. If not, the free version is not as well pronounced as I would say Rayon is. And then the Prisma diagram. So the Prisma diagram is, again, it's something that we as librarians refer our researchers to. Not everyone always knows about the Prisma diagram, but it basically is telling us how many articles we found through database searching, how many records we identified through other sources. So that could be hand searching, it could be a good conference paper that you know about that you saw being presented. It could be various other things that you have found, if you're including Bay literature. And then it tells you how many you've actually screened and how many records you've excluded, how many have been assessed. So there is a link to the Prisma. So there's also a Prisma checklist, which is quite useful, especially if the researcher that you're working with is particularly new to systematic reviews. The Prisma checklist is quite useful. And in fact, we worked on a scoping review a few years ago and we used the Prisma scoping guidelines, which really was useful for us. Yeah. So all this to say that it is advanced searching, but it is all what we do on a day-to-day basis. So hopefully none of it was terribly new to you. Yeah, and thank you so much. So typically when I do this at UCT, I do this as a almost 2-day workshop because we go into quite a lot of detail. But so it's a lot of talking to do in 50 minutes. But if you have any questions, please just, yes, I'm not sure if they can unmute or if there are questions in the chat.
Thank you, Tamsin. There's one question that I also want to ask. When we do a search on EBSCO, with the new EBSCO interface, it automatically takes all our databases. So I see you've got 40, we've got 48. So students, especially with a systematic review, have to say, I've searched on this and this and this and this database. Now it's easy if you say Scopus and Web of Science, but what about the EBSCO databases? Do you name them all, or do you just say the EBSCO database that the University of the Free State has access to? What do you do in a case like that?
So we are usually specific about which databases within the EBSCO database network. So for instance, if it is a health sciences student, and they've used Phenol, for instance, Medline, Health Source, we would actually list all of those as individual databases, and we'd say via EBSCO host.
Okay, but currently, it just searches across all 40 databases. So you're going to look into the list of databases to see which picks up the most results, or what do you do?
So we don't use so in where it says 40 databases on the top,
Yeah.
if you click on it, you can actually just unselect and then just select the ones
Yes.
you want.
Okay, so you select only a
Yes.
few, you don't select all,
No.
or
So
by
we try
default
to
all.
keep it as subject specific as possible. So for instance, mine with the maths anxiety, for instance. So we know anxiety covers psychology, so we will include psych articles
IPA.
and psych info. We will include, because it's education, so we include EDIC, and we will include SOC index because it's sociology.
Mm.
Um, and then CINAHL because it might cover psychology as well. So we'll be very specific in which, but we won't usually typically say all 40 databases.
Okay. Good. And then I'm sorry, I'm talking out of match. I'm going to give over to questions, other people's questions. That diagram that you use in the beginning is really very nice diagram. I love that. I'm going to print it out and just have it next to me, because I've got I had a scoping review yesterday with 16 results. I mean, that's ridiculous. You can't do a scoping review with 16 results. So, yeah, thank you so much. Okay, Nare, I see your hand is up.
Yes, my hand was up. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much, Damzin, for a good presentation. I also do live demonstrations in terms of the literature search to adult students where I work. But my concern is that adult learners, because they have to work and take care of their families, that is work-life balance, they don't really have time to learn truncation as an example. So the question is, how can we support adult learners to optimize the literature search on the online libraries that we subscribe to? Thank you.
Okay, so typically, the way we do it is when we meet with them, they come with their results, with their terms, and we will just help unpack it. But we take them through the searches. So if I just go back, I will typically do the line by line searching for them. And then when I give it to them, I will give it to them in this format so that it's easier for them to go and replicate those results themselves. But at least we know we've done it at least once. I'm going to say quote unquote the correct way. And then I will write this out for them. I'll write this out for them and give it to them. But yeah, so the way I support my students in that way is by at least doing what I'll say the hard work, and then give them an easier way to copy and paste this, and so that they can try and replicate it themselves. Does that answer your question? So they're not going to try and navigate where the truncation should be. That is our role as librarians. We are trained to do that, whereas our students aren't always trained to do that. We can explain it to them. We can say, I'm going to truncate this word, and this is what that means. So if I put the asterisk here at breathing, for instance, at breath, if I put it at breath, then it's going to search breath or breathing, or breathe. But I'm explaining that to them, but I'm not expecting them to necessarily know that coming into the consultation. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I was muted. It does. Can I make a follow-up question, if you don't mind?
Sure.
Okay. When I was doing my postgraduate studies, I found that EBSCOhost didn't have the literature that I was looking for. Alternatively, when I do searches on the Google browser or Google Scholar, I get more relevant results than I do on official libraries that are paid for in terms of the subscriptions. And in my experience with adult learners, I have noticed that students will start with the browsers, the open source databases to do the literature search. The reason I'm saying that this is because I also follow up the AI writing cases, including plagiarism cases. So it is a challenge for me in my career as a librarian to tell students to prioritize the online libraries that we subscribe to because they need to utilize scholarly publications or professional publications like books or journal articles. But it is difficult to get the message across. So how do you support students by making sure that they also become researchers as learners or adult learners? How do you navigate that challenge that I've just described? That's my last comment. Thank you.
So there's a time and place for Google Scholar. And in fact, we don't mind if they've started looking on Google Scholar because it's really great if they come in with papers that already relate to their topics. But at the same time, when we're seeing people for masters and PhDs, these are adults. These are people who have gone through the university process and are trying to create a serious scholarly piece of work. So, but for us, it's about explaining that to conduct a proper scoping review, systematic review, you have to make use of the literature from the databases. And the reason for that is that it's actually part of the methodology. And if you just gone to Google Scholar, you're actually not following the methodology directly. So what we always say is we're going to follow the route through the databases. Google Scholar, what we'll do for Google Scholar is, I think, Yesme, you mentioned that you were doing a scoping review and they got 16 or 18 papers. In that instance, what we do is we go to Google Scholar and see, are we finding more articles here? And what's missing from our search strategy that it's not being picked up? Is it because these papers aren't being indexed in the databases? Is it because our search strategy is missing critical terms? And if it's not being picked up in the databases, why not? So is it a good quality journal? Is it not a good quality journal? And if it's our search terms, then maybe we consider adding that search term to our search strategy. But the whole thing is there's a time and place for everything. And part of being a senior scholar is learning to use the scholarly tools. And that is our research databases. And so with us sitting with the researcher, so we expect our researchers to give us at least 1 to 2 hours when we are working with them for a systematic or scoping review. And through this process, we are teaching them how to use the databases properly. We show them how to get from our library webpage into the databases, signing in, saving searches, etc. We are working with them. So if we are giving them 1 to 2 hours of our time, they are giving their time back to us in return. And through this process, they are learning how to use it. And it is part of becoming a master's or PhD student. And just to say, we don't dislike Google Scholar. We love Google Scholar. We just time and place for everything.
Yeah, like you said, and the main thing is Google Scholar doesn't tell you what's the scholarly index. Why is it on Google Scholar? And I'm always afraid for predatory journals that can pick up on Google Scholar and it won't look on any good on any, especially not a systematic review. And then also systematic review, you can't reduplicate it on Google Scholar. So that's the main thing.
Exactly.
And if I do a search on Google Scholar and Tamsin is sitting next to me doing the same search, we're going to get different results.
You must always
It's
remember
a
that it is a search engine and not a database. So it's
yeah,
that
it's
replicability
just
aspect
Google.
isn't there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Any other questions for Tamsin? Okay, Tamsin, I really learned a lot. I've been searching and my one colleague that's been corresponding with me during the also we're searching on another way. So this was quite insightful. Thank you so much. Please, the presentation will be shared with everyone as well as the recording. And then the next presentation of this sort will be Introduction to Bibliometrics. So please keep an eye out for Liasa web news of training news on this. It's coming somewhere in April, I believe. I don't have a speaker yet. So anyone willing to do a presentation for me on bibliometrics, please feel free to contact me. But thank you again for everyone attended. I was very surprised to see how many people wants to attend a very, very specific search like systematic or evidence-based review. Tamsin, again, thank you so much and goodbye.